My fiance and I threw a dinner party one time to celebrate his mom completing chemo. I hired a caterer. We were expecting 25 friends and family, so it was more than the kitchenette of our single-story ranch house could handle. We'd also only just moved in, so we didn't really have a lot of cooking staples. The caterer said he'd bring everything 75% done, but he needed to finish off some dishes in our kitchen. I told him that was fine as long as he was finished before 5, because the kitchen is centrally located, and we prefer everyone to be finished before the guests arrived, due to the intimate nature of the occasion. The man said that would be fine. He arrives as scheduled at 12 p.m. We gave him until 5, and the guests aren't even arriving until around 6, so it's plenty of time. He smelled like actual dog shit, but his accent sounded European, so I thought maybe he just didn't believe in deodorant or something. It was more than a sweat smell, though. It smelled like a sun-baked diaper, and that made me uneasy. He was going to be preparing food for those who were sick prior, and for young kids. I just made sure he washed his hands, and then left him to his own devices, worrying I was just being presumptuous. Throughout the entire process, he kept pulling me aside to ask me questions and have me taste things. I was super busy because my husband had to work during the day, and pick up the surprise guest right after. So setting up the deck, decorating, and putting together the slideshow equipment, coordinating the surprise guest, and everything else was my job. Just a million other little details. Being asked every 10 minutes things like, "Do you prefer this with paprika or without?" was getting old. When he was still there at 5:45, after 2 gentle reminders, I flat out told him I needed him completely out by 6 no matter what. He apologized profusely, and said there had been a delay because our oven wouldn't stay up to temperature. I'd never had a problem before, but I figured since he's the professional, maybe it was a subtle one. A little before 6 rolls around, a few of our friends start trickling in. I decided to tell him whatever's done is done, and whatever isn't he should just put in the fridge. But suddenly he's nowhere to be found. I go out on the deck to ask my friends if they'd seen him, and he's out there, alcoholic beverage in hand, out of his chef whites and now in tee and jeans, mingling with my friends. I walked out just in time for him to introduce himself to my cousin-in-law as a good friend of mine. No, too weird for me. I met him in person for the first time barely 6 hours ago. I told him he needed to leave, now. He goes inside and gets his bag, and makes a beeline for my bedroom. I'm taken aback. "Excuse me? Where are you going?" "Oh, to change." First of all, we have a guest bathroom clearly visible. Second, why can't he just wear a t-shirt and jeans at home? I tell him I'm not comfortable with him going to my room, but he insists it'll only be a second. He goes in and shuts and locks the door. I couldn't even get a word out before he went in and felt helpless. I was going to go outside to ask one of my friends to help me usher him out, but at that point my fiancé got there with my aunt-in-law. I had to explain the situation to him, nearly in tears at that point. He pounded on the door, and the caterer came out still in the same outfit. My fiancé said, "You shouldn't be in there. You need to leave." The caterer said, "Excuse me, but this is not your house. It's not up to you to decide." My 6'4", 260-pound fiancé tells him that it actually, yes, was his house. He puts his hand on the man's back and guides him to the door. The caterer then says that he thought I lived here. My fiancé responds that I lived there with him, and the caterer goes nuts. He turns to me and screams, "You lied to me, you bitch!" I have no clue what he's talking about. He starts yelling about how I led him on, and calling me all sorts of names. I don't know who he thought the man in the pictures with me around the house was. My fiancé says, "You won't talk that way in my house. Go find the door." The caterer goes into the kitchen and starts throwing the trays of food out of the refrigerator and onto the floor. At that point, my fiancé realized two of his brothers, both currently offensive linemen at the college level, had come in and were on the deck. He signaled to them and they all came inside and basically said, "This guy is harassing me." Since they're a family of all boys and my fiancé is the first to get married, they don't get to flex their protective muscles too often, and jumped at the chance to toss this guy out. The party then went on as planned, but I insisted we just order pizza and throw out all the food he had made. My fiancé and friends kept asking me if that wasn't a bit too much, but I was insistent. We went out late drinking with his brothers and got home at around 3:30 a.m. and passed out in our room. At around 5 a.m., I was woken up to the sound of the door opening. I figured either we forgot to lock the door in our drunken stupor and it blew open, or one of his family forgot their keys or something in the house and didn't want to wake us up. His parents never ever let themselves in when they know we're home, and his brothers had had even more than we did, and were definitely not awake and driving at around 5 a.m. It wasn't nearly windy enough for the door to have been blown open, as it had been a tranquil night. I wake up my fiancé and whisper, "Someone just came into the house." He said the same thing. Probably my brother just left his wallet or something. I figured I was being paranoid and tried to put it to rest, when I hear a loud crashing sound. With that, my fiancé was up and on his feet in one movement. He told me to lock myself in the closet and call 911, while he went and looked around. As I was pulling out my phone, we hear in that distinct European accent, "Hello?" I realized it was the insane caterer. Now, I was not worried about this caterer physically overpowering my husband, or me for that matter, so I charged right out there. He was shirtless and clearly on something. He's taking the pictures that are just of me off the wall and holding several in his arms already. He lunges straight towards me when he sees me, and my fiancé gets between me and him and I call 911. My fiancé tells him the cops have been called, and it's in his best interest to immediately leave. The caterer just starts going on about how he has to make sure I'm okay. I start to ask him why I wouldn't be, but my fiancé rightfully says not to engage with a crazy person and feed into it. My fiancé stays between me and him while I climb out a window. He watches as the caterer throws photos of us all over the floor. My fiancé didn't want to subdue or touch him in any way, so the caterer couldn't make any assault claims. He'd begun to destroy our kitchen at this point, when the cops finally came in. He had a butcher knife. My fiancé considered going for the gun safe when he first got the knife, since we live in a stand-your-ground state, but he decided the situation was hectic enough without introducing a new firearm. The caterer didn't obey the police's orders to drop his weapon, and just kept saying that he isn't leaving without me, so they tased him. It was lucky for him he only got tased, and didn't antagonize my husband into squishing him. As he's let out in cuffs, he keeps shouting about how he and I are in love, and it figures I chose a macho thug over a sweet, sensitive artist like him. All women's are whores, etc. He continues on this tirade the entire time the police are reading him his rights. The police ask us to do an inventory of the house and see if anything's missing or damaged, besides what we'd witnessed him do. We go around and there's nothing, but then I remember that he was in our room yesterday and go through the room. All my panties from the dirty laundry hamper were gone, and my vibrator had been moved from where I keep it. We were so freaked out in the aftermath that we replaced all our kitchenware, toothbrushes, and sent our sheets to be professionally cleaned. We had a cleaning crew do a deep clean of the entire house. I'm so glad we decided not to serve the food to our guests. He sent me a letter from prison that thankfully my husband intercepted, because I was still recovering from the whole thing. We gave it directly to the police, who helped us get issued a no-contact order. He was sentenced to 3 years in prison 5 years ago, so he's out by now, but thankfully we never met again. This encounter happened in the summer of 2006, when I was just 20 years old. I didn't get my driver's license until January of that year, and driving opened up so many doors for me that I took a lot of solo road trips to my friends' houses in the New England and Mid-Atlantic states. I also looked pretty young for my age, and was often mistaken for a high school student in my early 20s. I was driving alone on I-78 on a random July day, on my way to visit my friend in southern Pennsylvania for a long weekend. Her parents were away, and we had the house to ourselves. We were planning on drinking or hot tubbing and watching Planet Earth drunk. It had just come out at the time. Maybe to run around some cornfields at night. I was so excited and had a great drive, listening to good music, and it was just a beautiful overall day. Right after I crossed the border from New Jersey into Pennsylvania, I stopped at one of the first rest stops to get gas and snacks for the last part of my drive. I've since tried to figure out which rest stop this was, but I can't ID it. It was just a gas station with a large mini-mart. Opposite the gas station was the on-ramp back to I-78 West, and parallel to the on-ramp was a dirt road, which comes into play later. I was heading into the store when a man in his late 30s to early 40s approached me. He was a very stocky guy, decently tall, had on a plain black tee and jeans with dark brown hair and a mustache. He had come out of a black pickup truck parked a few spaces away from my car. The man had a super intense gaze, and immediately creeped me out. He just had a sort of crazy energy about him. I don't really get vibes from people that often, but this was just so strange. He stood too close. His gaze was crazy direct and focused. His word choice was weird. Immediately, he set off all of my alarms. He asked if I was from the area, despite my Connecticut license plate, where I was headed to, if I knew anything fun to do because he had plans later and time to kill beforehand. He invited me to play mini-golf or watch a movie with him. I didn't answer any of his questions, declined his invitation to hang out, and told him I didn't know the area at all. I walked away towards the store. I was blown away that he asked me to go somewhere with him. It was really random and made me a bit uncomfortable. As I was walking away, he actually screamed out, "You're gorgeous," and the volume and tone made my hair stand on end. It was aggressive and inappropriate, and he startled a family walking out of the store because it was so loud. I didn't turn around to look at him, but just went inside. He came into the store shortly thereafter and kept staring at me, so I went to use the bathroom and stayed in for at least 10 minutes, texting my friend all about this creepo. When I came out, he wasn't in the store anymore, so I took my time buying drinks and snacks. I went out to gas up my car. I was relieved because his car was gone, and started thinking about the rest of my drive, getting excited to see my friend. When I pull up onto the road to get back to the highway, though, I hear someone persistently honking his horn, and see this creep show on the dirt road parallel to the on-ramp in his truck, honking, shouting, and waving at me to drive over to him. He was directly facing the gas station, and had been waiting for me to pull up. I immediately freaked out and jumped onto the on-ramp back to I-78. He pulled onto the highway after me, and I called my friend, extremely scared. I started to drive faster, and probably a bit dangerously. Looking back, I'm lucky that I didn't get into an accident because I was driving so fast, but I didn't know what else to do. He didn't follow me for that long, and I think after a few exits he finally pulled off. My friend and I had a backup plan that if I ever saw his car again, she would direct me to a police station the next town over from her house, instead of my going directly there and leading some freak to us. I didn't see the car again, and went to my friend's. But the last hours of my drive, I was extremely tense and anxious. I remember checking my mirrors regularly for this black pickup truck. It all ended well. I got to my friend's house safely, and we had a pretty nice weekend. The encounter was definitely creepy, but over the years, I didn't put that much more thought into it. A few years ago, around 2014, I was talking with another friend who's big into serial killers and mentioned my encounter jokingly, suggesting this might have been one. I told her my experience. She was fascinated and wanted to Google active serial killers in the Pennsylvania area at the time. The first hit was for Adam Leroy Lane, and he looked almost exactly like the man I met back in 2006. Obviously, it could just be my mind filling in the blanks, but the basic characteristics and the time and area all match up. In my memory, he was a bit slimmer than the pictures, and it was 2006, not 2007, when he was actually convicted of murdering women. Still, it's an odd coincidence, and one I've never forgotten. This happened a good few years ago. For some context, I was in my early 20s, single and living by myself. Most of my family lived about a 4-hour drive away from me. I was working for a small call center that provided, among other things, phone services for a 24-hour plumbing company, so they needed someone to be on the line at all times. My shift ran from 8 p.m. to whenever my boss showed up to pick up the line, which was usually about 6 a.m. I worked in a building that housed several businesses of the same sort, call center work mostly, though we were the only ones that had 24-hour services. Because of budget cuts, I was always the only operator on my floor. The only people in the building that night were myself and the security guy, who came to do his rounds about twice a night. Now, because the line had to be on 24/7, I was never allowed to disconnect while I was there. I ran to and from the bathroom, ate meals sitting in front of the computer, and every once in a while sneaked a cigarette at the window within the side of the screen. Only the light above my computer was on. Everything else was turned off when everyone went away at around 10 p.m., so I was left in this half-darkness beneath the spotlight. I desperately needed that job to support myself, so despite the crap conditions, I kept repeating to myself that it wasn't that bad. Things were usually quiet after 10 p.m. I could use the extra hours on my paycheck and didn't need to get a second job. I did a lot of reading and even considered going back to school because, if nothing else, the night shift would afford me plenty of time to study. So one night around 2 a.m. or so, I got a call. I introduced myself as I always did. "Hello, you were calling so-and-so. My name is Jill. How may I help you?" The guy on the other side repeated my name and hung up immediately. Working phone services on the night shift, you get used to a lot of weird stuff, so I shrugged it off and went back to my book. He then called again and asked if he was speaking to Jill. I said yes, repeated the company name, and asked him how I could help. He hangs up again immediately. The third time around, he asks if this is Jill on the phone, and I ask to whom I'm speaking. He hangs up again. The next time he calls, he's breathing hard on the phone and tells me he wants me to talk to him and he's not going to hurt me. I jot down his phone number and I start hanging up whenever his calls pop up, which was for the better part of an entire hour. This went on for months. When he realized I was hanging up every time I saw that number, he began calling from a restricted number, meaning I never knew if it was a legit call, and ended up answering. All the time, this guy keeps saying he wants me to talk to him, and that he's not gonna hurt me. The one time I counted, I hung up on this guy over 200 times in one night. Every time he would call, I'd say the company name, and as soon as I heard him, I'd hung up. I complained to my boss, but she did nothing. Instead, she laughed the whole thing off, because this guy obviously didn't know where I was, and he was only a voice on the line and I was perfectly safe. Some time into this, I started talking to my coworkers, and here's where it started to get really creepy. He never called on my days off, when someone else would be covering my shift. Indeed, at one point I even changed shifts with a coworker to attend a wedding, and he didn't call at all that day. As time went by, I was getting pretty spooked by the whole situation, and the fact that my boss did zero to try and stop this. My coworkers were all sympathetic, and told me that if my boss did nothing, I should file a complaint directly myself. I'm not sure I could, because this wasn't happening on my personal number. None of them could really walk me home, since I was the only operator in night shift. Everyone else was gone by the time my boss arrived and I left the office. I got a little paranoid, because obviously this guy knew my schedule pretty well, and even if I changed shifts, he would only call if he knew I was on the line. It had to somehow be someone who could see me. I started doing commute with my cell phone in hand at all times, with the emergency number dialed in just in case. Sometimes I did the whole commute on the phone with friends or relatives to keep calm. Since it's illegal to carry pepper spray here, at one point I considered walking around with a box cutter in my purse. That's how afraid I was. One day before my shift started, I was at the entrance of the building smoking a cigarette before going up, and I see a security guy come by. Same fellow who usually did the night shift, this huge man. I didn't really know him, never spoke to him much, only said good evening or goodbye when I went by his desk, and whenever he came to my floor to do his rounds. I usually kept to myself and never really made small talk or anything, just greeted him out of politeness and he greeted me back. He asked for a light, so I gave him my lighter, and he told me he'd been fired and he was going home. He went on to tell me that he always got the impression that I was afraid of him, since I was never friendly or welcoming. He then told me he was never going to hurt me, and just walked away. I lost every drop of blood I had in me. I went inside to tell my boss the whole thing, and discovered the man had been fired for harassing a woman on other floors, going as far as trying to corner someone in one of the elevators. The complaints filed up, and he lost his job. Most of the time his shifts matched directly with mine, so he would see me come in at 8 p.m. and left before I did. I asked my boss for that phone number again, to come forward on this guy. Asked the security number if that was his number. She told me she'd throw it away. When I told her the whole story, she found it cute. Then she asked me if I was sure it was him, because a voice on the phone is different and maybe you got it wrong. Quality assurance told us time and again that our every call was recorded, so I demanded the recordings. That's when I found out that, again, because of budget cuts and whatnot, the night shift was never recorded, so I had no evidence. Once the guy was fired, the calls stopped. I didn't work there for much longer after that. When I was about 16 years old, I decided to get myself a job for the summer. This would be the very first job I'd ever had, as my mom would usually be the one to provide me with money. I was pretty clueless on where to start, so my aunt did the heavy work and found me a job babysitting for one of her customers. She works at a salon, and the customer's name was Jeremiah. Jeremiah is a Nigerian man who always goes there to get a cut. She tells me he's extremely nice, and she presumes he's well off because he always tips well. I'm pretty excited, because babysitting for a couple of hours and making good money sounds like music to my 16-year-old self-ears. So about a week before I'm supposed to start babysitting Jeremiah's kids for the summer, I meet up with him. He introduces himself to me and wants me to meet the kids on a short trial basis, for about an hour a day from Monday to Friday. He agrees to pay me $30 for the hour, as he was paying me $10 for each child and there were 3 of them. I meet with the kids and they all seem pretty easygoing. There was a 2-year-old, Felicia, a 5-year-old, Jeremiah, he was a junior, and a 7-year-old, Heaven. All in all, it seemed like it was going to be a good summer. But it wasn't. The first few days of the trial went great. I would come see the kids and take them to a park or play a game with them until I had to go home. However, on the Friday of that week, it started to get weird. I came to the house as I usually did, and greeted Jeremiah and took the kids to the park, as I had been doing for almost about 4 days now routinely. However, this day was not like the rest. Jeremiah calls me 15 minutes into the day, screaming at me to bring back his children. I was terrified that something had happened, so panicking, I pack up the kids and we go back to the house. Once we're all in the home, he tells the kids to go to their rooms, and this is where the horror begins. He tells me that I'm no longer allowed to take the kids to the park. Confused, I ask why. He explains to me that his ex-wife often goes to the park and watches the kids and that he's afraid for their safety. Well, let me tell you, that's news to me, as when I first met him, he specifically told me that he and his wife had gotten a divorce. Why? Because she had been bringing men back to the home, and he had suspected one of them had been touching heaven. Those were his exact words. He also told me that his ex had lost her custodial rights and was in prison, so you could see where I was confused. Nonetheless, whatever doubt and confusion I had in my mind, I push it down and swear to him that if I ever did see her around the house, I would call the police, as he had previously told me he had a restraining order out on her. He tells me not to ever call the police if I see her, but to only call him. Again, I push the doubts in my mind to the side and reluctantly agree. The first month of the summer goes well. I spend about 4 hours a day with the kids, and during those 4 hours, those kids are preoccupied with their gaming systems or riding their dirt bike or doing whatever they want in their massive house. However, once July rolls around, things get a bit strange. Jeremiah starts coming home from work early on Wednesdays. That's not the strange part. The strange part is that he would come home early from work and expect me to remain at the home until my day was done. And he also starts to recruit me to do things with the kids and him, like going clothing shopping, going to the doctors, going to the supermarket, or even the movies. I was starting to feel more like a nanny than a babysitter. When I would express the idea of going home as I wasn't needed, he would always get upset and guilt me into staying. The kids need you. This is your responsibility. I was annoyed, but I let it go, as I'm only spending 4 hours a day there and getting paid very well. My sister Michelle, on the other hand, would openly tell me how weird she finds Jeremiah, and how she thought he was trying to groom me into being the kid's surrogate parent and his new wife. I laugh off the idea, as nothing even mildly inappropriate has ever happened. That is, until one day. I came to the home as per usual, and Jeremiah leaves to work. About an hour into me being there, I hear a knock on the door. Before I could ask who it is, Heaven sprints to the door and swings it open. To my surprise, it's a woman. I ask her who she is, and she tells me she's the kid's mother. I'm shocked and frightened, as that woman isn't supposed to have any contact with these kids. I tell her Jeremiah is at work and that I'm watching the kids in his absence. She gives me a very cynical look and tells me that I can go home as she's there now. I tell her Jeremiah told me not to let her in, and if she visits, that she needs to leave. I half expect her to curse me out, but to my surprise, she says, "Fine," kisses the kids goodbye and leaves. I quickly, in a panic, phone Jeremiah and tell him of the recent occurrence. He doesn't seem upset at all. He doesn't even seem surprised. Instead, he calmly thanks me for alerting him, and as he was ending the call, tells me that I'm a good girl. Again, I'm a bit sketched out, but proceed to continue to watch the kids. While I was there, I started to become curious on the nature of the relationship between the mother and the kids, since they didn't seem to really miss her at all while she was away. Therefore, I do the only logical thing I can do, and proceed to pry answers out of Heaven and Jeremiah Jr. To my utter disbelief, what I find out is shocking. It turns out the reason why the kids barely seem to miss their mother is due to her never being gone in the first place. They tell me their mother comes home every day, right when Wheel of Fortune is coming on. I ask them if she stays or goes to her own home, and they tell me she sometimes spends the night in their dad's room, but when he's mad at her, she leaves. So I ask the next logical question. I ask Heaven why her dad is often angry at her mom, and she tells me it's because Mom isn't a good listener. Right then and there, I get a chill, because up until that point, it seems like I'm putting together a puzzle, but none of the pieces are matching. I start rewinding to certain things Jeremiah would say to me, and certain things he would do that I didn't think much of. For instance, every time I was playing with Felicia when he was around, he would always tell me I'm a good mom. Not that I will be a good mother. No, that I am one. He asked me if I'm dating anyone, which I innocently answered that I'm not. He even asked me if I'm sexually active, which I rightfully declined to answer, although I'm not either. He becomes really touchy with me, always wanting to touch my hair or hug me goodbye. He comments on my appearance a lot, telling me how attractive and in shape I look. He makes me stay later on certain days, even after he's home. I get the feeling those were the days he kicked his ex out. And last but not least, Jeremiah starts to advise me to come in through the garage and not the front door when I come in the morning. Each time I do, I'm greeted by a shirtless Jeremiah who attempts to go in for a lingering hug. I honestly think he wanted something to occur in that garage. He would attempt to keep me there conversing with him in the dark. It was a combination of those things, as well as what the kids tell me, that makes me question the legitimacy of everything he's ever told me. I begin to think that maybe Jeremiah didn't want a babysitter, but a new wife to be the mother of his kids. As time progresses, I found out even worse news. Jeremiah's ex-wife isn't even his ex. They're still married. He apparently abuses her often, and is paranoid that she's having an affair with someone, so he sent her away to Nigeria for a month. I learn all this from the woman in the salon my aunt works at. Not only that, but also that Jeremiah constantly brings women home while the wife is away. She finds out about this because she sometimes pretends to go to work and stays behind to watch for visitors. She's asked him for a divorce, which is why he sent her away. I also learned that he would regularly threaten to kill her if she ever leaves him. By the time all this truth has come out, I'm done. I have about a month and some change left, but I tell Jeremiah I can no longer watch the kids, because I have to attend some basketball camp, which is a lie. He became visibly upset, and literally tells me I have to continue to come back. I tell him I would not be doing so, and that's when he starts to become irate. He calls me a slut, and tells me the only reason I want to leave the kids and him is because I was seeing other men. Mind you, I was 16 at the time, with no obligation to watch over his kids or him. I leave that day crying and don't come back the next day. My mom asks me why I'm no longer working there, and I tell her it was because the job was too stressful. About a week later, I'm up in my room and hear the doorbell ring. I didn't think much of it until I hear Jeremiah's voice. I creep down the living room to see him casually sprawled over one of our couches, as if he lives there. I hear his booming voice directed at my mother, and what I presume to be his authoritative voice. He states, "We need to talk about my girl. She hasn't been to my house in a bit, and the kids are starting to get worried. I don't like that. Where is she?" My mother, picking up on the strangeness of the situation, lies and tells him I've left with a friend, to which he has the audacity to ask whether it's a male or female friend. That's the straw that breaks the camel's back. My mom tells Jeremiah that his questions are invasive and predatory. She then asks him to leave, which, to my surprise, he does. From there on, I don't see or hear of Jeremiah for about a year. He still texts me, but I quickly learn to block his number. After a year, I learned some more information. His wife has gotten full custody of the kids, and they're living in another city about an hour from where we do. I thought that was miraculous, because Jeremiah makes it abundantly clear that those kids and his wife are his. A few months after learning that information, I'm jogging in my neighborhood when I wander by his house. I try to sprint past it, but I'm dead from my run. So instead, I opt to cross the street and stay a good distance from his house, in case he's somewhere nearby. I guess God was mad at me that day, because out of nowhere, Jeremiah pulls into the road and stops his car near me. He rolls down his window and asks how I'd been. I'm scared shitless, but he's pretty civil despite how we left things prior to this. He babbles on about himself and makes some off comments about my body, but what catches my attention is what he says towards the end of our conversation. He tells me his wife tricked him into losing custody of the kids. This is how it went down. She calls him while he's at work one day and tells him Jeremiah Jr. has been acting up. Being the abusive piece of shit he is, he runs home to show Jeremiah some discipline and respect. Well, his wife records the whole thing. The police are called and a report is filed. I guess that's how she's awarded temporary custody of the kids. However, he assures me that he'll be getting his kids back because they're his, and his wife will soon pay for her transgressions. The whole conversation made me feel uneasy, and I was glad when it ended. I ran home and briefly told my sisters about it, then never think about it again. Until I hear the news, a few weeks before my birthday, from my aunt of all people, that Jeremiah has gotten his kids back. His wife mysteriously falls ill and goes back to Nigeria before dying. I know it sounds crazy, but that's exactly what my aunt told me. Again, I'm frightened after hearing that news and disclosed to my sisters what he told me a few months prior to her death. About a year after, I'm jogging again and pass his house. This time he comes out of his house to wave me down. He asks if I want to say hi to the kids. I tell him no, as they probably won't even remember me. He then asks me something shocking. He asks if I want to say hi to his wife, and calls her to come out. I'm then approached by a very young woman, probably only a few years older than me, with a baby on her arm. She smiles and politely introduces herself. I'm shook. I exchange pleasantries and finish up my jog hurriedly. Once I get home, I tell my sisters what I've just seen. I don't know if Jeremiah did anything to his wife, but I have an eerie feeling in my gut that he's not at all that innocent. This happened when I was around 10. I live in a relatively small country, and it only took a couple hours' drive to get from my house to my aunt's in another county. This story starts off with me and my mom driving home from my aunt's. We're driving on a country road when this battered-looking minivan started driving in front of us at a roundabout. We were the only two cars on the road. There were gardening tools and a tarp in the back window. It was clear that the driver was either drunk, high, or a fucking idiot. They were repeatedly swerving in and out of their lane like they were a video game protagonist. It was a hot day, so both of our cars had the windows down. We could hear what sounded like a sermon blasting from their radio. We drove behind them for roughly 7 minutes with my mom muttering about the state of the country. The minivan abruptly stopped in the middle of the road, which roughly pissed off my mom. The driver then did an illegal U-turn, during which two things happened. I saw the driver's face. He was a skinny, middle-aged man with dirty yellow hair and a beard, and we both got a good look at each other's license plates. The driver turned into the opposite lane and drove past us, heading back into town, still driving erratically and almost hitting us. After he was gone, my mom pulled over and called the police to report him, giving them his license plate and a description of his appearance. The cop thanked us and promised to get right on it. When we were nearly home, my mom got a call from the guards where they told her they had arrested the man, who had warrants for drug dealing and domestic abuse. My mom was thanked, and we all joked about her being a hero over pizza that night. Cut to a few weeks later when school was starting up again. I had gone with my dad to the hardware store. While my dad was at the checkout, I was looking out at the parking lot when I saw the battered minivan driving out of the lot. I didn't see the driver, so I convinced myself that it was only a coincidence, although my dad noticed I seemed uneasy for the rest of the night. A few days later, my mom came home early from work, looking like she had just run a marathon. She gave me and my brothers tight hugs, and we were sent to bed far earlier than usual that night. I didn't learn about this next part until last year. The reason my mom was acting so weird is because her secretary had reported seeing a strange man inspecting the license plates of my mom's car. My mom asked what the man had looked like, and froze when she was given the description of the man we had reported. That weekend, my mom didn't want any of us kids leaving the house, but I was a stubborn little shit and all but demanded to be allowed out for a quick walk around the neighborhood. While I was out, and roughly 15 minutes away from my house, a vehicle drove past me. It was the minivan, and the same man was in the driver's seat giving me a friendly nod. As soon as he was out of sight, I ran back home and told my parents, who immediately bundled us all into my dad's car and drove to stay the night at Grandma's. I was put in the guest room but had zero chance of falling asleep, so I was wide awake for all the drama that happened that night. My parents called the cops and informed them about the man stalking us. A couple of hours later, a squad car pulled up outside and the officers told my parents everything. When they arrived to our house, they had discovered the front door had been forced open. Some of our nicest possessions had been smashed and were left in shards on the floor. But that's not the worst part. The worst part was where the police found the man. In the pantry, holding what a female officer described as the biggest damn knife I've ever seen. We spent the next few days at Grandma's, while my parents took care of all the legal business. The man was sentenced to life in a psychiatric hospital, and none of us have seen him since. I dread to think what might have happened had I not gone for a walk that day.